Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Might have a few more trickling in, but just go like this. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for sharing your evening with us on a Wednesday evening. My name is Karen Schlatter. I'm the interim director of the Colorado Water Center at Colorado State University as of August of this year. And I just want to recognize this is the first time we're having the Dr. Norm Evans lecture at CSU Spur, and I want to thank CSU Spur staff, Jocelyn Hiddle, for their collaboration on this event, and also thank our Colorado Water Center for all of their support in putting this together, and of course, thank our distinguished lecturer for coming all this way tonight, Pat Mulroy. So just a little, our program for the evening, I have some very brief introductory remarks. Then we'll have our lecture from Pat Mulroy. We'll have a little bit of time for questions from the audience. And then there's a reception following in the lobby and a cash bar. So just a little bit about us. If you are not familiar with the Colorado Water Center, we focus on interdisciplinary research, we drive educational programs, and we facilitate stakeholder engagement to address complex water issues in Colorado, the Western United States, and beyond. And we do that through collaboration, synthesizing water knowledge and resources, and inspiring the next generation of water leaders. All of this is towards a sustainable and equitable water future for Colorado. The Colorado Water Center is organized under the Office of Engagement and Extension at Colorado State University. That means we have a really community-focused drive. So we're kind of at the nexus of communities and the education system of Colorado. We're also one of 54 United States Geological Survey Water Resources Research Institutes. So there's one in each state and one in U.S. territories. And so we are the designated institute for the state of Colorado. Again, that gives us a statewide mission. We're focused all across the state, not just in the northern region. And our function, we work with other educational institutions from high schools to other four-year colleges, up to kind of the professional development stage. We work with water management agencies, other research organizations, communities, and other water user groups to address our water management challenges. And many of you in the audience, not all, but many of you have worked with us before in some capacity, whether that's through our Water Literate Leaders program, if you've maybe taught in one of our classes or maybe been a student in one of our classes, maybe been connected with researchers at Colorado State University or other research institutions. So if you haven't interacted with us before, I welcome you to this event, and I welcome furthering those relationships into the future and expanding on our relationships that already exist with those in the audience. And I want to recognize why we are all here tonight listening to Pat Mulroy, having the privilege to listen to her speak. So this is through an endowment that was made by Ken and Ruth Wright in 2015. It's called the Dr. Norm Evans lecture series in honor of Dr. Norm Evans, who's the longest serving director of the Colorado Water Center, which was from 1967 to 1988. And this is an annual lecture series that brings distinguished speakers to the CSU community to talk about water management, education, and policy. And Dr. Evans was known for his work as a founding member of Colorado's Commission to establish and apply water quality standards, and his commitment to public service and historical preservation, and for championing water research planning and programming. And I want to celebrate the fact that Ken and Ruth Wright are here tonight. They're sitting right up here. Please join me in giving them a hand of appreciation. We so appreciate their support of this lecture series and support of water programming in general in Colorado. And we know it was not easy for you to get here, so thank you so much. And this is just a photo of two of our previous Water Center directors, Ann the Wrights and Norm Evans. So now we are going to get right into it. And I will introduce Pat Mulroy, although she is a woman who doesn't really need an introduction. She is a leader in the international water community for more than 30 years, and she serves currently as a senior fellow for climate adaptation and environmental policy and a practitioner in residence for the Saltman Center for Conflict Resolution at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas Boyd School of Law. She also owns Sustainable Strategies, a consulting firm with corporate and public sector clients. Perhaps what she's best well known for, between 1989 and 2014, Pat Mulroy served as a general manager of the Las Vegas Valley Water District and also the general manager of the Southern Nevada Water Authority, which is the regional agency responsible for acquiring, treating, and delivering water to all jurisdictions in Southern Nevada. She's also served as a negotiator for the state of Nevada on interstate and international issues for the Colorado River. In 2007, she became the state's lead negotiator. Since stepping down from those roles in 2014, she continues to be extremely engaged in the water community, continuing to serve on several water-related boards and business boards nationally and internationally. She is the perfect speaker to open up this event, which is in conjunction with the Water in the West Symposium that's taking place tomorrow, because that theme is on building bridges and collaborative water action. So throughout Pat's tenure, she has challenged entrenched legal doctrine that has governed the Colorado River and pioneered bold new approaches for negotiation in the midst of crisis, which I think we need now more than ever, perhaps. So we're very excited to have here today. And let's see. Thank you, Pat, for your inspirational work in collaborative water negotiation and management. And please come up here. We'll give her a round of applause as she joins us.
Thank you. Can I close your computer?
Yes. No.
Oh, now you tell me. Okay, me and technology don't get along. As an old broad, I'm never going to learn, much to the chagrin of my children, who get very frustrated with me. I am delighted to be back in Colorado. Over the course of the 30 years, I've been up here quite frequently, and as I just told Jennifer, it's really nice to see that there aren't wanted posters with my face on them anymore, that those are gone. I never forget, if I came up here in the mid-90s after having put an ad in the Denver Post to buy Upper Basin water for Las Vegas, you can only imagine the reception that created for me up here in the Upper Basin. Not a very good reception. A lot of things have changed since then, and there have been a lot of agreements. There have been a lot of disagreements. The river community has been at odds, but it seems as the years progress, it just becomes more strident. Probably because the challenges that the river community faces have become that much more difficult to solve. And we've probably never really had to face these issues given a very chaotic political backdrop. The world changed last week, and those who are currently negotiating on the river don't know who the next federal steward's going to be, what their objectives are going to be, what their priorities are, what they hold dear, but somehow they're going to have to work with them. We had a secret sauce. We've always had a secret sauce. We've depoliticized this issue. It doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or whether you're a Republican. You're going to be just as thirsty if we screw up. It really doesn't matter. That having been said, that allowed us then to be very practical and pragmatic. It's getting back to that, which I would hope that, and I'm going to unwrap some of this here over the course of the next couple of minutes, we can get back to where there's a better understanding between the upper and the lower basin, because that rift has become that much more difficult to overcome. I am not here as a representative for the lower basin. I can chastise the lower basin. Give me a half hour if you want to hear me chastise the lower basin. Been a lot of misperceptions that have been bantered around down in the lower basin. I'm not a big fan of beating up on agriculture. Last time I checked, we all like to eat, we all drink milk, we all eat cheese, we all very much depend on agricultural output. So bashing them and creating this schism between urbanites and rural communities is completely counterproductive. I've never been one for winners and losers, and I've never believed that there are good guys and bad guys, and the notion of we have a problem and you need to fix it. That just doesn't work. That secret sauce served us well. So given the 30 years that I've been doing this, I thought the perspective that I would take, I'm going to go to 50,000 feet and look at the entirety of the basin. Because let's be serious here for a minute. What is the single biggest challenge facing everybody up and down the river? It doesn't matter what state you're in, or whether you're in the US or whether you're in Mexico. The effects of climate change. And what is the single biggest lesson we should have learned over the last 30 years? It's not that the change that scientists have predicted is happening, it's the rate at which it's happening. Things that should have happened in 2050 and 2060 are happening today. Every single model that's been thrown out there, every single probability statement that's been put out there has been fundamentally wrong from the get-go. So why do we still rely on it? Doesn't that mean we need to change our perspective? And it doesn't matter what part of the basin we're in? And that's expect the worst. The one thing that I think has served us well is that dramatic changes only occurred as they were needed to address the situation at hand. However, the plan on how that would happen was well laid out ahead of time. Then it was just a matter of executing it when the time came. Now, the lower basin is looking at cutting 1.5 million acre feet. Now, that's not permanent. So if they tell you that that's a permanent cut, that's not what it is. There's no way IID would go along with allowing themselves to be cut permanently from their water supply. It will be in reaction to dry years. It will be in reaction to protect Lake Mead from plummeting. Lake Mead is live or die in the lower basin. There is an elevation, dead pool, 895. If Lake Mead drops below that elevation, nothing leaves Mead, goes past Hoover Dam and goes downstream. That means Arizona, California, and Mexico get nothing. So protecting that lake elevation with whatever cuts you have to make in the lower basin to preserve that, and to do things preemptively by entering into agreements with agricultural to temporarily fallow and leave water behind, be it in Mexico or be it in the United States, or be aggressive in urban conservation and leave the water in Lake Mead so that we stabilize the elevation, is all important. Had that not started in 2007, Mead would be 60 feet lower today. We would have hit dead pool in 2021, 2022. It was only because of the efforts, predominantly of Mexico and of the agricultural community in Arizona and California, with Met buying out Palo Verde, large acreages in Palo Verde, that we were able to stabilize Lake Mead and prevent that crash from happening. That's why the lower basin is agreeing to a $1.5 million acre foot cut under certain circumstances. They now are going to go to Mexico and want similar accommodations from Mexico. Not 1.5, that would be their entire entitlement, but something. They are looking at the upper basin. And this is where the rub comes in. And I get it. Jennifer and I were just talking about it. When there are dry years in the upper basin, Mother Nature imposes those drought conditions on you whether you want it or not. State engineers take away pre-21 water rights. First in time, first in right. And those rights are tabled for that year. We were doing a percentage game over there. What is the upper basin by percentage totally cutting in a dry year? Because it isn't there. Not because they artificially agreed to a number. It's around 25% in the really bad years. We need to look at it differently in the lower basin. And the lower basin needs to come to grips with the realities of how water works in the upper basin. It's not that they don't know, it's that they don't want to accept it, which is ludicrous as far as I'm concerned. Right now, the entire strategy is based on two factors. One, that conservation, and don't get me wrong, I started conservation in Southern Nevada. I'm a fervent believer in conservation. I've always felt that urbanites used way more water than they needed because they had the luxury of being able to, but there is a limit of how far you can go. In Southern Nevada, we've gone from 320 to 240. Grass has disappeared. People are complaining about heat islands. No longer will evaporative cooling be allowed in any high-rise buildings. All those new hotels being built, all those data centers being built, anything that would rely on evaporative cooling can no longer do it. No more evaporative cooling, because that's 27% of a hotel's usage, because it's all consumptive. That is not easy. Can you imagine what happens to your power consumption when you no longer can do evaporative cooling? It's a balancing act. Swimming pool sizes have been limited. That's really popular with people, by the way. Everything is being done now in order to cut urban use, and I'm passionately in favor of that. Be it in California, be it in Arizona, be it in Nevada, anywhere actually in the basin. The other thing that they're relying on is recycling. Southern Nevada is going to invest in the largest recycling facility in the country that is being built by Metropolitan. They're going to take all of LADWP's wastewater and they are going to recycle it and they're going to use it for groundwater storage. That is a huge amount. But there's a problem with recycling. It assumes that water's coming from the house to recycle. When water conditions get so bad that inside uses have been cut, guess what you don't have? The raw material with which to recycle. Those are not new sources of water, they're efficiencies. Efficiencies that should have been in our water supply paradigm for a long time and just never made it in. Southern Nevada recycles 93% of everything that hits the sewer system. 93% gets reused. We have an advantage. We have a return flow credit agreement. So for every gallon of treated wastewater we put back in Lake Mead, we on paper have the ability to take an additional acre foot out so that it's a net consumptive use. But what it does is it made Southern Nevada a closed loop. Those are absolutely essential to get the way we currently use water under control. But we can't rely on just those arrows. If I'm standing here and I know all the models have been wrong, every single prediction we've made or probability analysis we've done has been wrong, why would I rely on that as an urbanite or as any water user? Why would I feel comfortable that that's going to give me the resilience and the sustainability that I need in order to continue to exist in this basin? You can't. Probably the best case in point is Southern Nevada building the third intake. We started building that in 2000, planning it, designing it, getting going on that in 2004. Hit construction in 2008. Now the third intake was a 3.5-mile bore underneath Lake Mead and then coming into Southern Nevada, which meant we could take water from Mead after it dropped below dead pool. That was $1 billion project, paid for entirely by the users in Southern Nevada. 100% paid for locally. Had we not started in 2004, when 2007, 2008 came and we were in the middle of construction, I had any number of politicians and board members wanting that project stopped. We didn't need it, they said. It could wait. One even redesigned it, and we had to teach him that pumps push, they don't suck, which was really interesting. But we bit the bullet, and we didn't stop. We fought the battles, we didn't stop. Had we stopped, had we waited to build that infrastructure to when we needed it, it wouldn't have been there. All of Southern Nevada's water comes from the third intake now. We would be in big trouble. Now, when I think about that in a broader spectrum, I say, shouldn't we today be looking at the worst case scenario? Shouldn't we today be looking at when can we cut no further without destroying whole rural communities and really affecting the economy in the lower basin or in the upper basin? Shouldn't we today be thinking about the next generation of infrastructure? And this is where we become paralyzed. There isn't a water project I can suggest or name that won't have its built-in constituency of opponents. And every roadblock and every problem is thrown at you. But the lower basin, as far as I'm concerned, had better start thinking about what is that next source of supply. And the only logical one, really is desalination. I've had the fortune of sitting working all around the world. Saudi Arabia is a client of mine. I've gone to Israel, I've gone to China, I've gone to Singapore. I've been around in those places that have issues. And I'll tell you, the one country that is absolutely sustainable, Israel. They have massive conservation, they recycle every drop, and they build one desalter after another in order to meet new needs. They got it. And they move that desalted water all over the country. We can't get out of our own way. there isn't a desalter we can't hate. It took 10 years to permit Carlsbad. That was ridiculous. And that's a pretty de minimis desalter. I know all the arguments against. We're going to destroy marine life. Not if you put the outflows way out into the ocean. Is that more expensive? Yes. Does it matter? No. We have hotels that cost $7 billion. Why would I get upset if a water project that can solidify and can provide resilience in the lower basin is potentially going to cost 10, 15, maybe even $20 billion? Who the hell cares? When you compare it to the potential loss of community, of economic output that could happen if you don't start thinking about what's that next generation of water project. Because if the lower basin could make desal a base loader and leave a lot of Colorado River water behind, it not only gives the lower basin resilience, it takes pressure off the upper basin. Somehow, that juggernaut has got to be broken. Somehow, somebody has got to say, we've got to start looking at why can we do it, not why can't we do it. Is there a feasible way that is environmentally responsible? Forget the price. I could care less about the price. That makes sense, that would provide some real desal for the lower basin. And there are opportunities. I've been working with Berkshire Hathaway. Berkshire Hathaway owns virtually all the geothermal resources in the Imperial Valley. If you were to build a water line from northern Mexico, northwest Mexico, it's the lowest, least amount of elevation lift. Bring that water into the Imperial Valley. Dump it in the Salton Sea. Stabilize the Salton Sea. Because it's far more salient than the ocean is right now. Let an outflow go way out into the ocean. Build an inland desalter using geothermal resources. The cities pay the cost, and let IID have that water. And leave IID water behind. You don't have to desalt it to the same degree of anti-salinity that you would if it was urban use. You don't have the same water quality conditions. I mean, water that gets to IID is pretty saline to begin with. They're used to it. So you could actually improve their water quality and get them off Colorado River water. Is it far-fetched? There are many who down in the Imperial Valley that would say no, it's not far-fetched. Is it technically feasible? Yes. Would it make an enormous difference, not only in the environmental health of the Salton Sea, but also in terms of providing an alternative water supply and starting to augment supplies in the lower basin? Yes. But we freeze, and we can't get out of our own way. And the minute anybody talks about it, holy cow, the guns start coming out, and the rhetoric starts, and we're done. If we can't overcome that, there's a day of reckoning coming. I have said to everybody, you cannot conserve your way out of it. Have you ever known a business to succeed because it cut its way to profitability? No. It can do it temporarily, but it's going to have to produce more output. You can't get profitable that way, and you can't become resilient and sustainable. Much of the rhetoric and hostility and confrontation that's happening between the upper and the lower basin could go away if the lower basin would start thinking at the 30,000 foot level. Go above the canopy. Stop counting the bark beetles. Get up there and look out 30 to 50 years and say, how bad can it get? We know we're in a cycle of low water flow, but we don't want to accept it. We want to be able to hang our hat on somebody's probability model that says, okay, given these circumstances, this is what we can do and get through. Goody. It's not going to happen. I long ago became a firm believer that if it's probable, it'll never happen. If it's improbable, expect it tomorrow. That's been our reality. I'm hopeful that at some point in time, the upper and the lower basin can once again return to civil dialogue that we were able to have before, where there's an appreciation for conditions, for communities' dreams, for communities' realities. You cannot ask of your neighbor what you're not willing to do yourself. That, in and of itself and in a nutshell, is what we are experiencing right now. Everyone's running scared. And I give the lower basin a lot of credit for the 1.5 million acre foot cut that they're going to put out there, should it be needed. But some of the demands to the upper basin seem unreasonable, even to me, as a longtime lower basin person. Everyone's becoming more strident. And the one reality that we cannot avoid is if that's where we end up, we'll end up in court. And they're already talking court in the lower basin. They're already saying, to hell with it, we're going to go to the Supreme Court, or let them sue us. Well, the last Supreme Court case took 20 years. What do you think the water conditions on the river are going to be if we do nothing and fight in the Supreme Court? And some genius in Washington, D.C., who's never been out here, becomes a water master and decides who gets what when. That's never going to work. If they allow that to happen, then everyone has failed. So let me just sum it up by saying they have to become far more willing to own this process in the same way that we were willing to own the process. Take responsibility for it, but look at it in a much broader context. This is a river-wide problem, and there has to be a river-wide solution. But finger-pointing is never going to get us there. If you were detached from the entire thing, and you just landed from Mars, and you looked at this whole basin, and you needed to solve it, how could you, if there were no boundaries, there were none of the political divides, how would you firm up this river? Look at it from beginning to end. We have to realize that the stakes are so high that we have to leave polemics and platitudes and name-calling at the door. They're not going to get us anywhere. And finally, we got to get above that canopy. There has to be a way to put it in language, and Jennifer and I were just laughing. It never is the reality of what you're actually doing, it's what you call it that matters. If I can wrap it up and call it something else, all of a sudden it becomes acceptable. If I look at it in a different way, it may end up in the same place, but if I look at it in a different way, then it might become acceptable. The swords and the guns need to be put down, and cooler heads need to prevail, and I am hopeful, not necessarily optimistic, but hopeful that there won't be a catastrophic shift in direction at the federal level, because they are an integral player in this, unfortunately, but they are. And I think at the end of the day, if cooler heads can prevail, then this is a river system that has proven time and time again, when push comes to shove, it can put its weapons down, it can send its lawyers away, go deal with something else, and come to some sort of practical solution. So with that, I thank you, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Don't be shy.
I'm going to grab my water bottle.
So you mentioned that some of the lower basins, if Lake Mead hits a dead pool, they will get no water. It's my understanding that the Colorado River has only reached Mexico twice since the 1990s. Is that accurate, or do I have that wrong?
No, you've got it wrong.
Okay.
That's great rhetoric, but what they're talking about, it's never reached the ocean. It is the cumulative effect of U.S. and Mexican use. You got to remember Morales. At Morales, Mexico takes water, even it sends it all the way to Tijuana. So there's a vast agricultural community that resembles IID on the other side of the border, that grows exactly the same things that IID grows, that contributes also. It's the delta they're talking about.
Okay.
There is for an ecological reasons, there's a lot of interest in restoring the delta to some extent.
I'm Jennifer, by the way. Pat, that's wonderful, and I thank you so much for helping us out and coming down and talking to us. I want to just shift gears a little bit and ask you, we're having quite a bit of conversation here in Colorado, in the metro area, about everybody having their own water system. And how can we work together better?
I mean, within the community, there's...
Yeah. So like in the Denver area, there's, I don't know, 20-some different water providers. Could you talk a little bit about how they formed Southern Nevada Water Authority?
Yeah, because that doesn't work. That's why we formed
Okay.
it, yes. We were rapidly running out of water, and we were 5 water agencies, fiercely competitive, and water that the Bureau had predicted, supply from the Colorado River that they had predicted would last until 2050, we were going to be running out by 1993. Something had to change. I mean, it got so bad that Boulder City, which is a true no-growth community, and they can do that because they're a federal charter city, they own every square inch of land within their boundary, and they only sell that land which they want to see developed, so they have total control. They were opening their fire hydrants to let water run down the street in order to ratchet up their annual use because they didn't have consumers to use it. It got so bad, we got so close to the brink. I had our staff do a supply versus demand model. How much had we committed in will serve letters, and how much supply do we reasonably think we have? We were way out of whack. Our liabilities were hanging out all over the place. So I declared a moratorium. No more will serve letters, no more new connections until we get this in order. Once I did it, the other communities had to do it too. So finally, we came together and decided to create the Southern Nevada Water Authority to deal with all issues that are regional. Nobody was separated from their customers. Every elected official, if you were a water customer of Henderson, you're still a water customer of Henderson. But anything that had to do with regional facilities, water supply, or finances was going to the authority. We also decided we weren't going to replicate the Met model where they have weighted voting based on assessed value of the community. Jeez. And they've come down from 56 board members to 32. Not that that matters. And so we have 7 board members. 1 board member for each water and wastewater agency in Southern Nevada, because we needed to balance water and wastewater use. It's all one supply for us. In order for anything to pass, water-wise or finance-wise or facility-wise, it has to be unanimous. One entity can stop the whole thing unilaterally. Guess how many times that's happened? 0. Because you know what happens? It's amazing. The minute you jump out there and you say no, you now own the problem. You said you had a better solution. You own the problem. You will be held accountable. You can't hide. So nobody's ever done it. Ever. The problems are all resolved before the board meeting ever happens. We also threw away our priority water rights. Under our system back then, Las Vegas Valley Water District could have water running down the street while Henderson, North Las Vegas, and Boulder City sucked air. That's ridiculous. That made absolutely no sense. So what did we replace priority water rights with? Shared shortage. In practical terms, that meant when we had to go into conservation mode, which of course in the 1990s no one thought we'd ever get there, everybody had to do the same thing. So the Water Authority adopted the blueprint, and then every single jurisdiction changed their water rates, changed their water ordinances, put the same restrictions in to where it was unilateral across the board. It didn't matter where you lived. You don't need priority water rights if you have a shared shortage arrangement. And it has paid well. We now had an agency that could contract with the federal government for return flow credits. And over the years, we've built almost $3 billion in regional facilities. We built a second intake, we built a third intake, we built a whole second treatment plant, and it has all gone without any major confrontation. So everyone maintains their identity. Everybody gets either a Henderson water bill, a Water District water bill, North Las Vegas or Boulder City, but on the things that matter, they all have to work together.
Can you talk about funding a little bit? How is Southern Nevada funded?
Funded? Water rates and connection charges. That's it. No federal money. In fact, we paid out the federal government out of the original treatment plan. They were so annoying. We ended the loan, and, well, they were controlling water lines in Tropicana, and the hotels were going nuts. So we just bought them out and sent them on their way.
Are you getting any encouragement whatsoever in your argument for desal?
Very little. There is some. It depends on where you talk about it. Everyone right now is thinking sequentially, which is we've got to get through the cut portion of it first, and then we'll talk about it. My attitude is talking about the cut portion is a lot easier when there's hope for augmentation at the end of this conversation, right? You're not saying to people that given conditions you could perpetually be in this state. So if you couple the two, it's a different conversation. But too many lawyers in the lower basin. Way too many lawyers.
A second question about climate change. We have another study out this last week from NOAA and UCLA about the influence of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions on drought. And you've been there for a long time. I'm curious, at what point was there a consensus in the Colorado River Basin about, climate change is real and it's not going to go away? Was there a year or any kind of a study or anything else that was the tipping point?
No, it wasn't a study. It was a series of events. The 2002 drought, where only 25% of normal runoff hit Lake Mead, was a wake-up call to the lower basin. Now, needless to say, in those days, it was still a religious argument. Is, climate change real or is it imagined? And so those that felt it was just a drought didn't know what to do as it continued and continued and didn't get better and didn't get better. And there was not that relief here happening that everybody expected. Quietly, it wasn't a massive shift of consciousness. It was quietly the naysayers got really quiet and stopped naysaying. So it was kind of a slow change.
What year might you say that the naysayers got real quiet?
Probably when by 2010, 2011, it still hadn't gotten any better.
Hello. I was just wondering, I'm not sure if you've given this talk before to other parts of the basin, but so you have. I'm curious to know how your talk would change if you were in the lower basin, if it does.
It doesn't. I don't change.
Okay. Fair enough.
That's the luxury of no longer having an official title and being in a role. I'm completely untethered. I can say whatever I want. And it gives me the luxury to be a wake-up call. And I did it the other week at ULI in Southern Nevada. Same thing.
Hi, Pat. I met you in your boardroom on a class field trip in 2003, right after, obviously, the drought. Do you think it takes a shock, kind of like we had in the early 2000s, to get us off the dime right now to really solve the problem, kind of as you mentioned,
Absolutely.
our current limbo?
If there's one thing I've learned about the Colorado River and human nature is that we don't change unless we absolutely have to. We don't like change. We are creatures of habit. And especially if in terms of water use. I mean, it was actually surprisingly far easier to get Southern Nevadans to take their grass out than I thought it was going to be. But the war we had around fountains was ridiculous. I mean, the mayor of Las Vegas almost had a stroke over his Kiwi fountain. So we finally said, fine, take out enough grass to equal 50 times the amount of water that fountain uses, and you can have your fountain. But no way were you taking fountains away in Southern Nevada. It became real emotional. Or get between a senior citizen and his car washing schedule. Also, not a very safe place to be. The canes came out.
So, Pat, Another on collision of law and climate change. Talk a little bit about our relationship with Mexico and what Mexico was willing to do with respect to the treaty.
Mexico agreed to a minute whereby, under the 2007 regime, we cut back as the elevation in Meade declined. Mexico agreed that they also would cut back at those same elevations. They also agreed that they would conserve sooner. They would do rotational fallowing of their ag and leave that water behind in Meade. In exchange, we allowed them to store water in Meade. That had never happened before. And I've given speeches all over the world on that. The two countries allowed each other to use facilities that the citizens of country A had paid for in order to solve a mutual problem. And Mexico is looking to us to see what we're going to do, or they're not going to budge again. And it took a while, as you well know, to convince them that this was real and we hadn't just made this whole drought thing up.
They were very suspicious of our accounting here, especially in the upper basin. So. Any other questions?
Can you also speak to the role of agriculture and water conservation? You talked about the importance of not demonizing them. They grow our food, but...
I'm not demonizing them.
Yeah, correct. You said that was important not to do. I want to know from your perspective, especially for those that are exporting crops or like distant investors that have water rights here, what role does agriculture play in conservation of water?
Okay, there's a lot of stories of individual little pockets. For example, Saudi Arabia bought a bunch of ag land in Arizona, right? And they're growing alfalfa there because they've developed a taste for beef. True. Go over into IID. Do they export some of their crops? Yes. Do we? I'll get to that in a minute. But most of their crops, the vast majority of it, they are 25% of this country's fresh winter fruits and vegetables. And they are the single largest supplier of feed to the dairy farms in California. So unless you don't drink milk and you don't eat cheese and you don't eat yogurt, any of that whole thing, it's a domino effect, right? You start cutting one thing back and it dominoes to the next. Everybody complains about the amount of water we export in alfalfa or other fruits, other crops, right? How much water do you think it takes to create a cell phone lithium battery? 1,300 gallons. Multiply that by the number of cell phones. That's all imported from China. Just that simple. Everything has a water footprint. Everything you import, everything you export. So to just point to one commodity and say, this is a problem because we're exporting our water, well, we import our water as well. Hell, we bought water in bottles from Fiji. You can't hide that. So it goes both ways.
Could you speak to the effect Native American populations will have on the water supply in the river as they begin to become more aware and involved in the whole situation?
They legitimately have gotten more involved in this last round of discussions, but their challenge is their water rights are embedded within the state's right? And uncoupling that is almost something I can't imagine happening, that they would, in their own right, without a state apportionment, have a water right. Now, they have water rights. Some in the lower basin even have prior perfected rights given to them by the Supreme Court. Those that have water rights that are currently in use are just as much a part of the solution as the non-Native American communities. Where the problem comes in is some are looking to sell undeveloped water, and that's paper water, right? It's never been used, it's not there. That's a rub, and that's a very difficult conversation because some of those tribes see their right, they have a paper right to that water, that they should be able to sell it to urban areas or ag areas or whatever in order to bring revenue into their community. That's very difficult in a water-stressed river under climate change conditions. It's a very difficult conversation.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Pat. And we will have our reception now out in the lobby. Feel free to stick around and mingle, and there's a cash bar. Thank you so much for coming. We'll see you next year.